Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Awesta Sarkash. I'm the Government Affairs Director at Small Business Majority, and we welcome you today's webinar to discuss finding solutions and navigating supply chain challenges. This is our first webinar in a series alongside the Small Business Administration entitled The Bottom Line. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. SBA's partnership in this co-sponsored activity is not an endorsement of the views, opinions, products, or services of any co-sponsor or other person or entity. All SBA programs and services are extended to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. Please do not put any personal information into the Q&A or chat functions. If you have any questions during the presentation, we ask that you add them to the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. This event is being recorded and it is being live streamed on Facebook, and it is also open to the press. Finally, you'll be receiving the on-demand link to this webinar and the slide decks after the event is over for future reference. A little bit about Small Business Majority. We are a national small business organization with a network of over 85,000 small businesses across the country. We have offices in California, Colorado, New Mexico, Georgia, the Midwest, and Virginia, and other representation across several states as well. Our organization focuses on research, education, advocacy, and networking. As part of our resources, we offer a free tool called venturize.org, an online hub for information and retirement, healthcare, and more. If you haven't already signed up for our network to access these free events and resources, please do. You can also connect with me directly, and you can find my information there or use the QR code on your screen to do just that. With that, I want to introduce Associate Administrator Mark Madrid. Mr. Madrid is the Associate Administrator for the Office of Entrepreneurial Development at the U.S. Small Business Administration. In this role, Mr. Madrid will lead the OED, which is the SBA's technical assistance arm with a national resource network, including small business development centers, women's business centers, SCORE, and the Office of Entrepreneurship Education. Previously, Mr. Madrid served as CEO of the Latino Business Association Network, a national 501c3 organization focused on strengthening America through funding and supporting U.S. Latino entrepreneurial research and education impact programs through Stanford University. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Awesta. And Small Business Majority, of course, our SBA team, and most importantly, thank all of you, small businesses who are joining us here today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are energized that you joined us, especially a day after the holiday weekend, but we know that you don't take a break from owning your small businesses. Having been raised in a small business family, I say it all the time, it is the highest honor imaginable to serve U.S. small business owners. And Isabella Casillas Guzman, our 27th Administrator of the United States Small Business Administration, a President Biden cabinet official, and the voice of over 33 million small businesses across the country, she often asserts that small businesses are the giants of our economy, and we couldn't agree with her more. It is with her vision that we launched this Bottom Line series. So we're energized for the series, particularly because we will ensure that the SBA is offering resources and insights into the timeliest issues impacting our small businesses across the country. Today's session, in fact, will feature supply chain challenges and how to navigate through them with solutions. So with that said, we have subject matter experts here for you today, including our first guest speaker, Greg Britton. Greg Britton is the Chief Executive Officer of the Florida Small Business Development Center Network, Florida's largest and leading provider of assistance for small and medium-sized businesses. In this capacity, Greg is responsible for overseeing the operations of the network's more than 40 offices and over 250 employees, delivering the Florida SBDC strategy and ensuring the network continues to exceed stakeholder expectations and contribute value to the economies of the state of Florida and the U.S. overall. Greg, thank you for your precious time, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. I'm so honored to be here today and be able to speak with all the small businesses here in our nation. And so good morning or good afternoon from where you're at. I'm in San Diego today, actually attending one of our conferences. So anyway, let's get started. Can I get the next slide? Yeah, go ahead. The next one, I'm sorry. Yeah, so let's talk about the problem here. We want to talk about how these supply chains are affecting our small businesses and what we're seeing. So we want to put data behind that. So the next slide. So, many of you are seeing this, right? And so what's causing some of these supply chain issues? We have global disruptions. Those disruptions are the, Ukraine-Russia war. There are the tensions with China and Taiwan. They are, of course, still lingering impacts from COVID. And, you're still seeing, shutdowns in China and Japan and many other nations that actually bring supplies to the U.S. So, until we see those starting to go away, these supply chain issues are still going to be there. So we got to figure out ways around those. Costs of raw materials are increasing. Why is that? It's shipping costs, it's oil costs, it's, the fuel costs that we're seeing today. They're all compounding what the cost of that raw material is, and not only from the production of the material, but also to get it to the manufacturer. And then the cost of onshoring, we think about that, but it may not be sustainable. And what I mean by that is it's a lot of cost for the small businesses to bring anything back and have that in their area where they operate. So, we're still vetting that out, but right now onshoring, it's you can bring it back. Of course, it takes a long time. It's not a real quick solution, but we're hearing that it's not sustainable. Workforce shortages and retention issues. You've all felt those, I'm sure, as small business owners. But when people aren't there to man the production lines or the service counters or whatever, it delays that product, and that's a piece of that. What's causing that supply chain to break down. And inability to source raw materials. What we're seeing there is a lot of the larger corporations have, a lock on the material market. And when you're a smaller entity, you don't buy as much product, so that you're not getting the services that a larger company might get. So you're missing out on some of that raw material, or maybe it's a truck body that you're modifying to do something with, on an airport or whatever. You might not be seeing the number of truck bodies you want to see, and somebody else might be getting those because they buy more. Cash flow issues due to having to place larger orders. And, that's a big issue for our small businesses. We've always been taught to be just in time, to be as streamlined as you can, as efficient as you can, and not tie up a lot of cash around inventory. But today, that's kind of what we're hearing is changing a little bit. It's a just in case inventory now, that in case of my order doesn't show up. So now I'm leveraging, my lines of credit or whatever to buy that inventory where I really needed to do other things with it, maybe to expand or whatever. And then the profit margins are thinning because of all those costs of the materials going up. We talked about that inventory, maybe paying more interest on your lines of credit, and you're not able to pass that cost on to the consumer. And the other thing that we heard a lot about here in Florida was efficiencies of moving freight through ports. And it's, as soon as that freight leaves the country of origin and it gets to, let's say, the United States, the quicker that container can get through the process, where that's offloading from the ship through customs onto a truck to get it to where you're at, is very important for our small businesses. And what we're seeing there is and especially when it comes to perishable items, sometimes it's not coming through the ports as quick as it is, and we're seeing a lot of issues with those perishable items not being 100% when they get there, right? So next slide. So recent data that we've seen, 61% of small businesses indicate their supply chains have been disrupted by the pandemic and worker shortages, of course. As a result, 63% have had to alter their supply chains in the last 6 months. We talked about the reasons and the problems behind that. We also saw that 86% of small and medium-sized businesses' supply chains have been impacted. That's a huge number, so especially when small businesses make up over 99% of our economy. Businesses in retail sector have experienced the greatest impacts, is what we're seeing from the data. 32% reported that supply chain disruptions have significantly impacted their business, and 36% moderate, and 23% mildly have impacted their have been impacted by supply chain disruptions. And this is a big one, and I talked about this a little bit earlier. Average commitment lead time for capital expenditures was 186 days. That's at an all-time high. That's increased 38 days since July of 2021. And what that really is when a small business owner decides that they're going to outlay cash to buy something, and they think they're going to get it in a certain amount of time, and they don't. The average is 186 days, and that varies by complexity, right? So if it's, the manufacturer has a bolt, a screw, a washer, something that's pretty easy to get, that's of course not the situation. But when you're talking, an automobile or whatever, that's 186 days. So the more complex it is, the more lead time, but you can imagine that's a cash outlay. What does that do? Increased interest rates if you're using your lines of credit. Maybe you thought that you're going to be able to put that piece of equipment in service in the fall of this year, and then it turns out it's January or February of next year. What does that do to your taxes, right? You got to think about all those things. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about my personal experience, just I think it makes a little bit of sense here. I own and operate a water sports business, something very similar. Got some folks that run it for me, but what do we rent jet skis, we rent pontoon boats. I went to the dealer back in 2021, actually in 2020, October of 2020, and said, I need new equipment. I need new wave runners. I need new jet skis. I need new pontoon boats. And luckily, because I put my order in of August of 2020, I got my equipment in 2021, but the dealership told me, he says, you are lucky. You're the only one in your area that got these new pieces of equipment. Well, let me tell you the story today. I've been a big believer of, Yamaha outboard engines on a pontoon boat. And I was told just about 2 weeks ago that don't even expect a Yamaha engine to hit this country until 2023 is over with. So you can see that these are huge issues when it comes to businesses. What does that do? Like, that increases my maintenance cost because I'm using older equipment. It's increasing, it's decreasing my customer satisfaction rate because maybe my equipment wasn't as great as it was 2 years ago, and then maybe it breaks down or whatever. So, I'm seeing it even in the water sports business, right? So I know that every industry is experiencing this, and I have that, the utmost sympathy and respect for the small business owners that are fighting their way through this. And I know we'll get through this. Next slide, please. So what about some of the solutions? Go ahead and forward it. So some of the solutions might be to prioritize the risk of products to manage cash flow. What does that mean, right? So if you have an item that you just know that there's only one supplier for, maybe that's a high risk item to you, and maybe you do have to buy a little bit more inventory. Let's say it's a product, though, that it's not really a high risk. Maybe you don't have to buy more inventory. Let's say it's a product that you can maybe find 2 or 3 distributors for. So really sit down and think about your supply chain, and then lay out what those risks are and how to manage your cash flow so you aren't just buying a bunch of inventory and eating up a bunch of cash flow or eating up a line of credit. Leverage your data for decision making. If you're in manufacturing, leverage that ERP, the Enterprise Resource Planning software. If you have a point of sale system, look at that point of sale system. What are you selling the most of? What are you concerned about from that risk management piece you just took in the first bullet? And really think about how I can use that data that I am generating in my business to make good decisions moving forward. And that might be that you might have to even change maybe a menu item. For example, if you're a restaurant owner, maybe there's something you're really having struggles getting in, and maybe it's time to maybe just change the menu a little bit, right? It's some things you can get. Develop a relationship with your supplier. I think that's really, really critical. And what I mean by that is that the owner of the company or the manager of your company picks up the phone and says, hey, man, this is where I'm going with this. This is what I need. Here's the supplies I need. Here's kind of when I'm going to need them. The better relationship you have with that supplier, the better chance you're going to have to continue to have your inventory. Very similar to that wave runner jet ski scenario I was talking about. I don't think if I didn't have that relationship with that person, I'm not sure I would have gotten those pieces of equipment back in 2021. And I might have been using even older equipment. So network with similar businesses and suppliers to find solutions. In the end, supply chain is a network. There's people out there having exactly the same issues that you're having. Maybe they figured out how to solve it. So, if you're in a manufacturing business, I'm using manufacturing because I actually worked in that for a lot of years, but there's manufacturing associations that you might be able to go to some meetings to just figure out what's going on. And then modify your offerings. I kind of already talked about that. Like if I'm going to use the restaurant as a prime example of that. Maybe you're having problems with one thing that's coming in, or maybe there's something that's it's so expensive now that you just really aren't making the profit you want on it. Use those leverage that data. Like I said, maybe you modify that a little bit and just to keep customers coming in the door and keep your employees there. Look at vertical integration when practical. And you say, what is that, right? Vertical integration is really if you're taking control of the beginning of the supply chain all the way to the end of the supply chain of that business of your business or that product. Or it could be backwards as well. If you're at the very end of the supply chain, maybe you go the other direction. But in this case, it's really from the front end of the supply chain going to the end. Just take a look at that. Is there things you can do internally? Example of that. Let's say that you have a product that you're manufacturing. Maybe it goes out of house for a little bit of assembly. Maybe it comes back in house. Maybe you do some quality stuff on that. Maybe it goes back out of house for a plating, paint process, whatever. And maybe you're hitting, delays in each one of those pieces. And maybe it's not all just about the money. Maybe, you can absorb that internally. So maybe you look at bringing that assembly in-house and taking control of that. Maybe you look at that paint process. Maybe you can do that, right? You just got to take and do your analysis on that and make sure it makes sense for you. Retaining your workforce is key. So I think anything you can do today to diversify your business, to do anything you can to keep the product coming in your doors and going out your doors to make revenue and generate profits, retains your workforce. And as we all know, workforce is the today's gold, right? Be clear with customers. And what I mean by that is customers understand supply chain now. They probably didn't before, but they've heard a lot about supply chain, the issues they're having. You're not the only businesses that are, having effects from supply chain issues. So, when a customer has an issue, be very clear. I have done that in my business. Hey, I'm running older equipment. I apologize. We're just trying to be here. We're trying to service our customers the best we can, but I can't get new equipment. So this is what the cards that are dealt, and we'll work through this. And then the last bullet here is work with your local SBDC network consultant. And I say Florida here, but in every state there's an SBDC, and they provide one-on-one consulting to really help you understand cash flow, inventory processes, feasibility studies to understand does it make sense to diversify, and what does that diversification look like? Is there a demand out there for what you're thinking about doing? So I think that's really key as well. Next slide, please. So is there any questions that you might all have?
Greg, hello. Thank you so much, Greg, for your insights. I do have a couple of questions I'm seeing out in the chat. And Joyce, thank you for your question. What is the government doing about this? Well, we partly fund the Small Business Development Centers. So that's one of the solutions that we have. Greg, so thank you for that question. Greg, you noted in your presentation, and thank you just for simplifying this into the problem and the solutions. You noted that small businesses should be clear with customers about supply chain challenges. How do you suggest that they do that without losing their customer base?
Yeah, and there's a fine line there, right? So you know your customer base, and as the small business owner, if you've had this reputable, glowing results and stuff on social media, your Facebook likes and the Google likes and all your social media pieces, right? If you've got those glowing reviews, those customers trust that you know what you're doing, right? And I always feel like just being honest and having a conversation with them when somebody's, might not be happy with your services. I'll give you another example. I was talking to a restaurant owner just over the weekend, actually. And it's simple restaurant. It's actually a food truck, but he was really having trouble getting different supplies. And he buys his stuff from just local stores there in the community. And he was talking about, as simple as it was tater tots. It was simple. He couldn't get them. And he was talking about the potato shortage, and he gave me a long story, but he said several of his customers noticed he, wasn't probably, giving the portions he was used to giving. He said, here's the situation. You go to a Walmart, you go to Publix, or you go to this store, look in the freezer department, look at what is there, and look at if it's gone, I can't get it either. I'm just trying to make sure I can do as much as I can with what I've been given. So the customer, he said, really appreciated that, and told him, he says, you know what, I'm coming back here, because you've been honest with me. So I think that honesty means a lot to the customer today.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you, sir. And I'll see you here in a little bit.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Got it. Next, small business owners across the country, thanks again for joining us. We are absolutely grateful to feature our next presenter, Zachary Davis. And we thought it was absolutely imperative that you hear from a pure small business owner. And that's exactly who Zach is. Zach is co-founder of the Glass Jar Inc., a Santa Cruz-based restaurant group focused on the nexus between sustainable food and community. Current brands include the Penny Ice Creamery, an ice cream manufacturing and multi-location retail business dedicated to the use of locally sourced, organic, and seasonal ingredients, and also the Picnic Basket Cafe. As CEO of the Glass Jar and a serial entrepreneur, he enjoys active involvement in all aspects of the business. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. In 2018, the Glass Jar was selected by California State Senator Bill Monning to receive the Small Business of the Year Award for the 17th Senate District. And in 2014, the Glass Jar was the recipient of the Business of the Year from the Santa Cruz County Chamber of Commerce. Zach also sits on the Small Business Majority's National Small Business Council. Zach, I don't know how you squeeze in the time to do all this, but we appreciate that you're here as a small business owner, and welcome.
Thanks for having me. I don't have any slides, so I'll just jump right in. Thanks for the introduction. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the small business perspective. I'm just going to jump right into the supply chain issues because definitely some of those things that have been touched on we are experiencing. And actually, I do want to say the SBDCs are a fantastic resource in founding our business and getting started. Both securing financing and putting together our business plan. We worked with our local SBDC here in Santa Cruz County that's hosted at Cabrillo College. And it was just a tremendous help. So, if you're a small business owner or an entrepreneur that's thinking about getting into business, I absolutely encourage you to reach out, find and connect with your local SBDC. Well, let's see, equipment. So we manufacture ice cream and we make it from scratch. Not all ice cream places do that. A lot of them buy a pre-made base and flavor and freeze it. We buy all of our ingredients individually. In the state of California, that means that we have to pasteurize our dairy. So we buy organic dairy and then we have to repasteurize it because it's already pasteurized. That's the rules. Our pasteurizer went down about a month and a half ago. And it was the control unit. And normally we'd be able to call the manufacturer who's based here in the United States, and they would just send us the parts and we'd plug them in and away we'd go. But these are motherboards, control boards, display boards, microchips, and they didn't have everything we needed. So as they secured them, they were sending us one piece at a time and we'd plug it in and We'd try to, we'd see if it worked. If it didn't, we'd ask for the next part. And we ended up being down for 2 weeks, which is a critical path. The pasteurization is a critical path in our manufacturing process. And so that was a huge deal. Ways we were able to solve that, one of them was the expertise of our staff. We were able to move some of the production to the stovetop and actually pasteurize on the stovetop, kind of the way it used to be done. And then the other piece looking forward was we decided to buy a second control unit to have as a backup. But as was touched on, that meant an outlay of capital that we weren't necessarily anticipating, but we felt like it was worth the risk because this is such an important part of our manufacturing process. We're waiting on 2 ice cream dipping cabinets. We're told 14 weeks. So I think that's about thankfully, about half of what those capital outlay delays are averaging. So I guess I feel fortunate having learned that stat, but still, in the meantime, we're spending money to try to keep units that are failing running. So spending money on repairs, maintenance, and obviously that's not an ideal situation. Ingredients, we do source very locally on kind of the flavoring side of things. So we buy a lot of produce within the county and neighboring counties. A lot of times these are farmers that are, the number of acres that they're farming are in the single digits. But berries this year have been really challenging because these will be small family operations, but when it comes time to harvest, they need to bring in additional help. And that help has been difficult for them to secure. So for us, just getting, the basic strawberries, raspberries, blackberries at the height of the season when they need to be picked, it's been a challenge. As was mentioned, having transparency, keeping in communication with our farmers. We're very active in our local ag community, but keeping in communication with them, finding out who's able to pick and what they have. We were able to take what are called seconds. So sometimes this is fruit that's not ready for the grocery store shelf or the farmer's market shelf, but we can use it because we process it, and so it doesn't have to have a perfect appearance. But also it means that sometimes we do have to pay a premium and buy those kind of store shelf or farmer's market stand ready fruits and vegetables to use. Eggs, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, aka the bird flu. We're buying organic eggs. They tend to be locally produced, but still, the bird flu has had ripple effects throughout the industry. So that's been a challenge. One thing that we can't work around, Tahitian vanilla bean. Vanilla is our #1 selling flavor. That's not something that we can stop offering, but it has been a real challenge getting vanilla beans from Tahiti, and that is a long distance import. We haven't gotten very good information from that particular vendor or vendors. We work with 3 different vendors, kind of depending on who can get those for us, but it's been a challenge. Not a lot of good information forthcoming there, other than just, sometimes it's weeks that we have to wait. Finally, I would say kind of paper goods. We're dealing with some local environmental regulations, which we support, but to encourage businesses to use increasingly compostable and sustainable packaging solutions. But that has meant that those producers are sometimes smaller, hard to find. And so our vendors are switching from one manufacturer to another to make sure that we're getting compliant packaging materials. Sometimes that means we'll end up with a scoop cup and a lid that aren't compatible. So we have, as was mentioned, we have moved to placing larger orders. But again, that's tying up cash when we're trying to stock higher volumes of paper goods in order to ensure that we have compatibility and that we have sufficient supply. And that's kind of extended to things like our t-shirts and hats that have our logo on them. The producers of our t-shirts were just not able to get the blank t-shirts that they needed. So we just don't have those right now. And that's something we've just had to do without. So kind of to sum up, prepare and anticipate. I mean, I spend as much time as I can, everything from like reading long range weather forecasts to find out how that's going to affect agriculture, trade magazines, talking to vendors, and then stockpiling as we can those key components, and then figure out how to make do. Staff expertise, I can't understate the importance of that and the ability to kind of think creatively when faced with challenges. And outside support, the SBDC, and I think was mentioned, manufacturing, trade associations, things like that. We've reached out to all of those. And then sometimes you have to figure out how to go without, or as was mentioned, switch to offering a different product or solution for your customers. And the one thing in closing I want to mention is I really appreciate that that some of these things they're cash or they're creative solutions, whatever, but so much of that comes down to time, whether it's chasing down one vendor or calling multiple vendors. For small business owners and entrepreneurs, time is often the most precious commodity because you really are doing everything all the time. And I want to cheer on all the folks out there that are working through these challenges and making a go of it and doing the best they can. So congratulations to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I mean, what a great perspective from an actual small business owner. And you connected so many dots from your vanilla bean shortage and what's happening in Tahiti to paper goods, even to your logoed items. And then you talked about, trust as well and resources through the SBDC. Just a couple of follow-up questions for you. As we go into this period, because small business owners never take a break, even if it's the holiday period upcoming in the new calendar year, what do you foresee for your business specifically when it comes to supply chain challenges going into 2023?
Yeah, that's a great question. Weather is a big one for us in the food and beverage industry. We've seen price spikes, we've seen prices come down, which we always appreciate when that happens. So that's an important one. The labor piece is also really critical, and I did see that there were some questions and comments about that. It's a challenge. We're just trying to show our appreciation to our staff in any way we can, schedule after hours get-togethers, really focus on training and giving them the resources and tools that they have or that they need to be able to do their jobs and do their jobs well and feel empowered and comfortable and confident in showing up. And as much as possible, try to keep it fun. We just had, it's hot in Santa Cruz right now. Typically, we're in the mid to high 70s this time of year. We're in the 90s, upwards of 100. It's at one of our locations, and so we're just making sure we have enough staff on when we can, making sure that everybody's feeling supported. That's a really important piece.
Thank you, Zach. And also, we have some questions about your digital strategy and partly solving for closing some gaps here in this space. Any thoughts on your digital strategy when it relates to supply chain issues and challenges?
Well, as was mentioned, we definitely use our point of sale to provide us with information. And I got to confess, I'm a little guilty of chasing point of sale systems that provide good information for my particular industry. I think it's paid off. So I would encourage folks to spend a minute looking at the solutions that are out there. And I know it can be sometimes challenging to get information about, because you're talking to sales folks and they have a job to do. It can be challenging to find that solution that's best for you. But that's where if you have a trade association, a lot of times they can be really helpful in identifying whether it's a point of sale system or a customer management system. They can be really helpful in finding solutions that are best for your industry. And I do think that I'll just say, I know it's hard when you're an entrepreneur. Sometimes, you in the food service business, you just want to make delicious food and you don't want to have to be an IT professional or a social media guru. but it is worth taking a little bit of time and either connecting with some resources that can support you in those things, or doing the research yourself to find out those solutions that are best for you, because it will pay off.
Thank you, Zach, for those insights. And I want to touch upon something that Greg mentioned, and you also stated this in your remarks as well. There's something magical that happens when small business owners are talking to other small business owners. So I'm sure that's happened, and you've referenced that. But what more can we do to build up this peer-to-peer mentoring system? And it can go beyond boundaries. You wouldn't have to be bound by state boundaries or regional boundaries, but literally I've experienced instances where somebody in Alaska, a small business owner, was collaborating with somebody in Connecticut. And I think that's also going to be a key to this whole, time, because it's going to take precious time. As you said, time is a commodity. But you've probably experienced that yourself in terms of any ventures that you have with fellow small business owners.
Yes, well, I will say every time I find the time to get together with other small business owners, I always appreciate the information that I learn and the insights that I gather, and I always say, why don't I do more of this? And then you get sucked back into the day-to-day, and it is a challenge. I get that, and I'm sure a lot of folks who are participating understand that. I think this webinar series, I really hats off to the SBA for putting this together, and Small Business Majority for helping out. These things I think are great. It allows us to see that there are other people out there, other people that are feeling our pain and feeling our challenges, and celebrating our successes with us. That's so great. On every level, whether it's you're a local business association, our downtown association, for example, is just a fantastic group of people. But if it needs to be virtual, that's great too. It's one of those things. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, but for your own sake, do try to carve out a little bit of time to reach out to other small business owners, and that they're. Everybody that I've talked to, it's just so nice to get that support and give that support, and it just makes the whole thing a little bit better and a little bit easier.
Thank you, Zach. Well, I look forward to doing more research on your companies. Thank you for your spirit of entrepreneurship and also providing solutions and being able to empathize with your peer small business owners. And so with that said, that concludes our two featured presentations. We thank Greg, we thank Zach. And with that, we're going to move into our Q&A portion of the agenda. And for that, I'm going to turn it to my friend, Awesta. Thank you, Awesta.
Thanks, Mark. Well, this question, I'll start with Greg. Greg, there seems to be a theme of questions in the Q&A about when people can anticipate some of these supply chain challenges going away. Do you have any sense of that or anything you could touch on?
Yeah, I don't have a good sense for that. I'm just going to be honest with you. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty right now when we're going to see the supply chain get shored up. I think it's, again, it depends on how complex the product is you're buying, right? If it's something very simple and there's a lot of manufacturers out there for it, a lot of distributors for it, it's going to shore up a lot quicker. And then, you can't anticipate the disruptions of, COVID still. I mean, I could just say, I think it was like I was reading last week, I believe China shut down again because of some COVID issues. And I know Japan just got off of another shutdown maybe a couple weeks ago now. So until all that starts smoothing out, you're going to still see these disruptions. From my experience with the outboard engine, I mean, at 2023, they said you aren't going to get them. And very similar theme with wave runners. I had to switch brands of what I would normally run in my business. So I think it just depends on where you're at in the supply chain and what the complexity is of how long it's going to last.
And one more question for you, Greg. I've seen this question a few times. In your presentation, you mentioned that the cost of onshoring is not necessarily sustainable. Can you touch on what you mean by that and why? Yeah, sure. So, for a small business, if you're importing just several, maybe crates, containers a month, or you're getting something supplied from outside the U.S. and you're now going to think about bringing that in,
you know, how do you do that, and how much money does it take to do that? And that's the piece that a lot of these smaller businesses, you know, a larger business can sustain that, right? But a smaller business, how many things do you have to bring over to get your supply chain back to where it was at, you know, pre-COVID or whatever, you know, is making the issue today. So it's just that the cost of doing that. So, you know, one of the manufacturers I was talking to here in Florida, they were talking about, you know, just trying to find, instead of bringing it back from where they're at, just basically taking that supply chain down out of the country and then finding local suppliers. But even that's been a challenge for them, right? So I feel like at some point when the supply chain all smooths out again and such, the other piece of that is that competitiveness that you're going to be as a manufacturer or as an entity. If you might not be as competitive, you know, once things start smoothing out again. So I guess it was really around, you know, it's not sustainable because there's so many other things that affect that supply chain that we don't think about as far as cost and such from outside the U.S. and getting that cheaper still, right? So can you stack that cost on as a supplier by that onshoring and all the money you have to outlay to do that? So
thanks, Greg.
That was the gist of it.
Gotcha. Thank you. One last question here for Zach. What are you hearing from other small businesses on this supply chain challenge front?
I mean, it's across the board. You know, kind of as I touched on for us, you know, it could be anything from labor to technology to, you know, large pieces of equipment, you know, textiles. We don't always have a lot of transparency into what's going on. So I think that, you know, the thing I'm hearing the most is I'm working really hard to navigate these challenges, and I hope it gets resolved. But, you know, like, yeah, you know, bringing onshoring the solution is not, I can't think of a single small business owner that I'm talking to that's a feasible solution for. So they're just, you know, they're either looking for shorter supply chain, like geographically shorter supply chains, you know, stateside supply chain solutions, you know, or, you know, buying more, getting in as early as was mentioned, getting in as early as they can, you know, trying to anticipate as best they can, placing those orders early. That's what I'm hearing. But in general, you know, we're kind of eagerly and hopefully looking towards a not too distant future where some of this stuff will kind of smooth out.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Zach. Thank you so much, Greg and Mark, and to our interpreters for joining today as well. And most of all, thank you to the small businesses who joined us for today's webinar series. Please be on the lookout for additional webinars as part of the Bottom Line webinar series, where we address timely topics and issues like inflation, like supply chain. And I know there are a lot of questions about labor shortages and so on. So please be on the lookout for those. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with Small Business Majority. And thank you all for joining. Thanks.